Okay, part two, we'd already talked about kind of what is a thread pool, talked at a high level about what the general types of thread pools are. I'm going to talk about the core interfaces the Executor framework provides, and as you can see, there's just a handful of them. So there are several key interfaces. These, again, if you recall Java, these are really just defining methods. With Java 8 and beyond, you can now have default methods, but that's not as important at the moment. Just the point is we have these interfaces, and you can see there's 4 of them. Executor, Executor Service, Scheduled Executor Service, and Completion Service. These 3, Executor, Executor Service, and Scheduled Executor Service, are related to each other through inheritance and extensions. The Completion Service is kind of off to the side, but as you'll see, they actually interact with each other as well. So the Executor is the most basic, and I mean, it's really basic. The Executor Service interface has one and only one method in it, and it's called execute. And you give it a runnable, which they call a task for various reasons. And so the Executor interface defines a way for a client to execute a task somehow. Now, again, we'll talk how later. Typically, you use this to have it execute the task in a background thread, although there's actually a single-threaded executor. So if you want to use that, you can. It just doesn't really give you any concurrency boost. So that's what the Executor does. It's really simple. So because of that, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it because it's so simple. Much more interesting is the Executor Service, which extends Executor. So it also has an execute method, but it also has a boatload more methods, probably like 20-some methods. I just show a subset of them here. And some of these methods can be used to submit different kinds of tasks. For example, you can execute a one-way task that's a runnable, but with Executor Service, you can submit a two-way task. It's a callable. And you'll get back results through things called futures. We'll talk about those later. You can actually run a bunch of callables all at the same time. You can run a bunch of callables and pick one result. You can run a bunch of callables and wait for them all. And then you can also do various kinds of things on the Executor Service itself. So for example, you can shut it down gracefully. You can shut it down immediately. You can check to see if the service is shut down. You can check to see if it's been terminated. You can wait for it to shut down. These are all sort of lifecycle operations that are used to control the lifetime of instances of the Executor Service. And oh, by the way, things like the fixed size thread pool and the cache thread pool, those are all examples of things that implement the Executor Service interface. There's another interface called the Scheduled Executor Service, and what it does is it extends Executor Service. So Executor Service extends Executor, which is really simple. Scheduled Executor Service extends Executor Service, and it adds the ability to be able to do time-based task execution. So you can schedule something and you can say, I want this task to run once in 2 minutes. Or you can say, I want this thing to run every 10 minutes starting in 5 minutes. So you can either do it periodically or you can do it in a one-shot way at some point in the future. So that's Scheduled Executor Service. And then the final approach is basically the Completion Service. And this is a more interesting model of parallel computing. And basically what it does is it decouples the invocation of a task, which can run in a thread, from the processing of the results of the task when it finishes. And the analogy I like to think about there is sort of like going to a dry cleaner. You drop off your suit or your shirt or whatever, your bedding or whatever you want to have dry cleaned, and then at some point you come back and you pick it up. And the person who drops it off doesn't have to be the same person who picks it up. You just have to have some way of knowing that something's done. So we'll see that you can submit callables or runnables to a completion service, and then those will run in the background, and then at some point you can get the results. And we'll talk more about that. It's a pretty cool model. All right, that's all there was to that one. That's a really simple, really fast overview.